Today I'm going to be talking about loops. A loop is another flow control concept that's going to let us run the same code over and over again a configurable amount of times. And in this video I'm going to talk about how you can configure different types of loops. Another really related topic that I'm going to be talking about is the list in this video. And that's because the list is an example of a collection. And collections and loops are very related to each other because, as you'd imagine, you loop over a collection of things in programming. Alright, let's get into the coding environment. As usual, I'm going to be opening up my terminal. I'm going to change the directory to my desktop. To zoom in a bit for you guys. And then I'm going to create a file in my desktop that I will start writing code in. I'm going to open that with TextEdit. Change some sizes over here. And we should be good to code. So as I said, I'm going to be talking about lists in this video. So let me give a motivating example. Let's say we have students and we just graded their exams and we have the list of exam results and the grades list. I'm going to write down a few grades here. Now before we do anything else, let me teach you how to work with lists a little bit in Python. So with lists, when we want to access an item in a list, we have to know the position of the item that we're accessing, meaning I want to access the third item in the list, right? So 1, 2, 3, that would be 75. So to access an item in a list, what we do is we type in the name of the list and then the position that we want the item from, okay? There, it's as straightforward as that to access an item from a list, almost. So in Python and many other programming languages, the position of an item is actually its distance away from the first item. So the third item in the list, 75, is 2 away from the first item. So we actually have to type in that 2 that I just mentioned. Okay, that's how we access the third item in the list, because it's 2 away from the first. Print that out and see that we should get the 75 that we expected. We'll run the program. And we got the third item in the list. Cool. Now, what if we wanted to add another item to the list? How do we do that? In Python, we type in listname.append. Append is pretty much saying, I want to add an item over here without hard coding it, right? So let's append another test score. Let's append 58. And now let's access that item. It should be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to expect it to be the 5th item in the list. And, oops. And, bet, cool. 95, that item we just added. All right, cool. So now let me give you guys an example problem, okay? Let's say I wanted to look at each student's grade and assign them a letter grade based on their score. So if it's above a 90, it's an A. If it's above an 80, it's a B, and whatnot. What we would have to do, given what we know so far, is we would have to go to each position and say if grades at position is greater than ... if grades at the other position is greater than ... okay? We would have to compare every item in the list to a number to get the student's actual grade. Now, what happens if I wrote that code and then I add another item to the list? Well, then I'm going to have to add another condition. That is not a sustainable approach, and it is not dynamic. It doesn't work for every list size. We would need to know the size of the list for that to work. So, one perfect use case for a loop is to iterate over a collection of an unknown size. For example, this list that we have here, okay? So, we're going to repeat a block of code, the thing that I was talking about, the conditions, for each of the items in the list. And we're going to assign a letter grade to each of those items, okay? So, let's do that. In Python, to create a loop that will loop over a collection, we type in for, and then let me put ... here for now. For ... in the collection. So for ... in grades, we execute this code block over here. We're gonna do something, okay? We're just gonna print. Now this dot 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 more specifically represents the items that we're looping over. So let's say for grade in grades, now this grade, every time the loop loops, will represent one of these items incrementally. So the first time this loop executes, grade, the variable grade, is going to represent 100. Then it's going to represent 64, then 75, and so on. All right, so let's print out grade and see what we get. We should see all of our grades, and we do. Perfect. Now, as I said before, we don't want to just print the grades. We want to check that if the grade is above 90, we'll print out a letter grade, okay? These are things that we've dealt with in our last video if you haven't watched it, writing conditions. So if the grade is greater than 80, then I'll print out a B. And I'm not going to go too far. I'm just going to print out C for everything else. Print C. Cool. Now, if we look at the grades, 100 is by our definition an A. 64 is by our definition a C. 75 is the same. 88 is a B, and 95 is also an A. And that's exactly what we got. So cool, you can see how loops are pretty cool. And if I was to add another item in this list, right, grades.append 10, yeah, because that is a small number, then we would get a C for 10 as well, which we didn't have up here. Okay, so for the sake of making this a complete guide, I'm going to teach you guys how to configure the same loop in a different loop construct called the while loop. So the way the while loop works is that we have the keyword while and then space and then some expression over here that evaluates to true. And while this expression evaluates to true, so while it becomes true by Python, the code that's inside of the loop is going to execute. So while true, print out high. If I do this, it's going to print high indefinitely. It doesn't even look like it's printing because it's printing so fast. But what we want to do is we're going to loop over this list still. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to come up with some expression that represents us being within the loop. So we're going to keep track of our position in the loop. And if our position gets out of bounds, right? If our position gets past this last item, then we're going to stop looping. So let's capture that concept into code. So while inside loop, and that's a variable I haven't created yet, I'll do that now. Well, inside loop equals true. So we start off inside the loop, okay? And now inside of this while loop, we're going to keep track of our position, which starts at 0, because remember, 0 represents the first position in the list. So we start off inside the loop and with our position as 0. Now we're going to ourselves upgrade this position by 1 every time this loop executes. At the same time, we're also going to be performing the same code that we had in our while loop. So if you look at our while loop right now, while we're inside the loop, we're going to do what we were doing before, same thing in the for loop. And then after that's done, we're going to increment our position by 1. And that visually translates to us going from, for example, 100 to 64, or from 64 to 75, or from 88 to 95, or from 95 to outside of the loop. Now, once we get outside of the loop, we're going to set this variable to true, to false, sorry. So how do we calculate when we're inside the loop? Well, inside loop equals whether or not the position is less than the length of the list. And this is how you get the length of a list in Python, or of any collection. You type in len, and then in the parentheses, type in the name of the list. So we're inside the loop while the position is less than the length of the loop, which makes sense, right? So now this is going to update. And then our code's going to loop. It's going to go here. And if this is false, meaning if our position is greater than the length, it's going to exit this loop and go down here. Now there's one more thing that we want to do in this code, and that's the fact that we have our position, but we don't have the value in the position. So to get the value in the position, just like how we had grade in our for loop, we're going to type in a grade equals grades at the current position we're in. And now we have access to the value in our position. Cool. So now let's execute this code. And as you can see, we have the same exact output as we had before. Now let's clean up this code a bit, because this variable that we're calculating all the time, we can simply remove and replace the variable with the expression that we need. So while the position is less than the length of the grade, we're going to execute this code block and increment our position. And that's what a while loop looks like. Now, in this example that we have here, it makes so much more sense to use a for loop because we don't really need the extra control that the while loop gives us. But it's nice to know about the while loop. Alright guys, so this is the second most important flow control construct, the loop. Another important flow control construct, known as a function, is what we will be getting into in the next video. Thank you guys for staying tuned.